What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and this week we're going to be taking a look at a deck that I'm going to dub the Splinter twin of the Pioneer format. It involves a combo that is not necessarily relatively hard to deal with per se. It's been something that's been played for the last few months but has taken on new life and having some interesting ways of being able to innovate in the format as a lot of the other decks have, and it continues to stay relevant and probably one of the best combo decks that you can play in the format in terms of its effectiveness to play against some of the more aggressive decks in the format, while also just getting to hose and race some of the slower decks in the format. So today we're going to be taking a look at Abzan Greasefang for the Pioneer format and looking into its various upgrades and things of that nature that the deck has undergone since the last time that we looked at it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the deck. So here we have the Abzan Greasefang deck piloted by Daryl Ayers, who played it in the Pioneer 30K RCQ and made a top 4, it looks like getting a 4th place finish with a 10-2-1 record. Before we dive too deep into the deck, of course, I have to say, if you have not already subscribed to the channel and you want to support me and my work, go ahead and consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like on the video, so on and so forth, if you want to see more stuff like this, along with some other discussion-y type videos as well, and of course other videos on the modern format, because that's what I do here. On top of that, I have a link in the description of this video to join the Discord server. Go ahead and follow that link and join to talk about Magic and all the other fun, heavy stuff that comes with playing the game, because I love talking about Magic. I love everything to do with Magic, and it just makes me happy. So without further ado, let's go ahead, look at the deck. So Abzan Greasefang, the deck essentially tries to assemble a few things. It tries to get Parhelion 2 in the graveyard, which Parhelion 2 is an 8-mana vehicle that has Flying, First Strike, and Vigilance, and when it attacks you create 2 4/4 Angel creature tokens with Flying and Vigilance, and they are attacking, and it has Crew 4. And the Parhelion 2 is a 5/5 on its own. So essentially, what you're trying to do, get a Parhelion in the graveyard, or in the case for some of these other cards, Iska's Chariot or Sky Sovereign, into the graveyard, so that on turn 3 you can play Greasefang, Okiba Boss, which is a black, white, and 1 for a 4/3. That says at the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Then you return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So Greasefang preferably gets back a Parhelion 2 at the beginning of combat. You are still in the beginning of combat. You crew the Parhelion 2 because it has haste from the Greasefang ability. So you're able to use Greasefang to crew the Parhelion 2. Then you attack with Parhelion 2 and you deal 13 damage to your opponent. Now, while that's probably not going to kill them, you do have 2 4/4 Angels back left to attack. You have a Parhelion in your hand, so you're able to kind of get it back into the graveyard with like a card like Rafine's Informant, and then fetch it back with Greasefang, and then ultimately finish off your opponent with a bevy of flying, attacking, lethal creatures. Obviously, Sky Sovereign and Iska's Chariot both play some similar roles in the fact that they are going to be a lot easier to play, which getting Iska's Chariot and getting to play it and just, put 2 cats into play, be able to crew with the Greasefang and then attack and make another cat. The Iska's Chariot goes back to your hand, and then you're able to play it even on the next turn. So you're going to have like 10, 14 power into play, depending on if they deal with a Greasefang. And you're just able to attack with Chariot and copy your cats, and more than likely, at worst, trade with one of your opponent's creatures to then put the Chariot in the graveyard, which the Greasefang will be able to get back, and then go to your hand, and so on. This deck has incorporated kind of this value engine of sorts, just by getting to be super grindy in what it gets to do. Sky Sovereign getting to shoot down creatures and other planeswalkers, again also being crewed by Greasefang, and allowing you to be aggressive and deal with your opponent's board while also getting to chunk in for a big piece of damage. Also having flying, so it has that evasion to kind of get around what your opponent's doing if they're able to go off the ground. So obviously that's kind of the reason why we play these vehicles. We know we want to get them in the graveyard, and we know we want a Greasefang. So how are we kind of like salvaging all this together? So you have cards like Stitcher Supplier, Rafine's Informant, and Satyr Wayfinder in the creature slot that all do different things. Stitcher Supplier, when it enters or dies, you just mill 3 cards from your library and you put them in the graveyard. Rafine's Informant lets you connive, which means that you can draw a card, attempting to maybe look for one of the vehicles, or you're trying to find like a Greasefang or even an Eldritch Evolution, things like that. And then ditch one of your vehicles if you have them into the graveyard. Makes this a 3-2, so it does get to crew Sky Sovereign, notably. It doesn't get to crew Chariot or Parhelion. Satyr Wayfinder also lets you find that crucial third land, with the option of also, finding your third land, putting the rest of the cards in the graveyard. Hopefully they are a vehicle. You could also end up milling over a card called Can't Stay Away. And while it is a little bit slower, you can flush it back for 5 mana, so eventually you can just get back a Greasefang if there's a Greasefang in your graveyard. You have Thoughtseize and Duress. These cards are mainly going to be to disrupt your opponent, stop them from being able to interact with your graveyard, interact with your Greasefang, things like that. Also in a pinch, they can just be used to target yourself and get one of these cards in the graveyard if you know the coast is clear on your opponent and you just really need a discard outlet. It's something that I don't think players normally think about when they play decks like this. They think, oh, discard spells, I don't want to discard my own card, I want to discard my opponent's card. Thoughtseize and Duress 1000% can be used on yourself. It might not be done as often as you would think, but it is a possibility that it can and will come up at some point, so just something that's worth keeping in mind. You also have cards like Grisly Salvage that lets you put a creature or a land from among them into your hand. You put the rest into the graveyard. This is essentially like a Satyr Wayfinder, but you get to see one more card, and you have the ability to pick a Greasefang if you already have enough lands in play to cast it. Mana based, you have Blooming Marshes, you have Branched Off Pathways, you have Concealed Courtyards, Darkboard Pathway, as some of your painless come into play untapped over the first few turns of the game. You have, of course, some Godless Shrines and some Temple Gardens, just getting to make sure that you have all colors of mana needed to cast your spells and do that in a timely manner. You have one Swamp, you have a Beseiju to kind of interact with some of the other decks, the other Greasefang decks, and even the Karn, mono green Devotion decks that are running around as well. In the sideboard, you have cards like Duress, just another card that comes in against the control decks just to make sure that the coast is clear. You have Portable Holes to interact with some of the more aggressive decks in the format, mainly mono white, mono red, a Tarka red, and things like that. Raven Feeblement is another card that can be used against the white decks. Just the fact that it gives -4/-4 for 1 mana when we have cards like Grasp of Darkness that do it for an extra black unconditionally. Raven Feeblement definitely plays its role very well in trying to slow down the mono white decks. You have Abrupt Decay that can interact with Greasefangs and some of the other things that your opponent could be doing in the mirror matches. On top of that, just also getting to be an efficient tool to deal with some very efficient threats. You have Briar Bridge Tracker that gets +2/+0 as long as you control a token, and makes a clue token so you are able to crack and eventually draw a card. Also gets to crew your vehicles and stuff like that, which can be pretty important. You have Go Blank, which is one of the best ways to exile, deal with the graveyard. You get 2 cards out of your opponent's hand, you make them put them lower on resources, and you just exile their graveyard. And on top of that too, there's more Sky Sovereign for those creature matchups and for those pesky planeswalkers and things like that. So the Abzan Greasefang deck is pretty simple in nature what it wants to do. The combo is very simple. You want a Greasefang and preferably one of your vehicles in the graveyard, and getting to do so with cards like Grisly Salvage, Satyr Wayfinders, Rafine's Informant, Stitcher Supplier. You're going to be able to put tons of cards in the graveyard. And even a card in MS2, Eldritch Evolution, is going to be able to find a Greasefang more easily, essentially giving you a 5th and 6th copy in the deck, as long as you have a Stitcher Supplier, Rafine's Informant, or Satyr Wayfinder, which, of course, all those cards you can find with the Grisly Salvage and things like that. On top of cards like Can't Stay Away, that if you already put a Greasefang in your graveyard, maybe because of a Satyr Wayfinder or discard spell, you're able to, for 2 mana, go and get it back as well. The deck has evolved. It didn't, I don't think, normally play East Chariot Sky Sovereign, especially maybe it played one Sky Sovereign, but definitely didn't play East Chariot, and it's now seeing a lot more play. Obviously a 4 of in the deck. It's hard to outgrind this deck really when it gets going, and Iska's Chariot makes it very hard for the aggro decks to kind of compete with it, because Chariot just gets to block and more than likely take out one of your opponent's big creatures. The cats end up getting to do it, and then the Greasefang just brings it back, makes more cats, and then so on and so forth. The cycle just kind of repeats itself to where you kind of have to find a way to beat the Chariot in non-combat situations while also getting to beat the Greasefang, which some of those aggressive decks have a hard time doing, and some of the slower decks also just have a hard time dealing with Iska's Chariot, because short of like board wipes and the nature, they can't deal with Iska's Chariot. The only saving grace for those decks being that is a crew 4 instead of a crew 3. So Rafine's Informant with like a counter, or like Informant plus Supplier. Rafine's Informant needs that counter to be able to crew with another creature and things of that nature. Sky Sovereign 2, I think being 4 copies in the 70s is overkill, but you know, there are definitely players that are smarter than I, and Sky Sovereign is just an aggressive enough card on its own, and it is feasible to cast at 5 mana for this deck, especially with all the ways that you have to ensure that you hit land drops, so this card is probably fine as well. And of course, the bow that ties the gift together, Parhelion 2, just getting to deal tons of damage and really take your opponent out of the game really before they can get started. So that's kind of like the draw to playing this deck. You have a combo that is relatively hard to interact with in games. One, the Rakdos mid-range deck is the only one that really has, I think, a chance of being able to mess with this combo super heavily, but even then it kind of has to have the right mix of cards to be able to do that. On top of just getting to be something like the burn deck that we looked at in Modern, where if you just kind of have a nice little curve out draw where you're able to get back even just an Iska's Chariot or Sky Sovereign, and Sky Sovereign doesn't have anything to hit, you can attack your opponent for 6, and then eventually, like on the next turn or two, play a Sky Sovereign or get back a Chariot, get back a Parhelion, so on. It can just be enough to knock your opponent out of the game and just make it very hard for them to come back. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this look into the Abzan Greasefang deck. Highly recommend playing it. If you enjoyed this video and you want to support me and my content, or you want to see more videos like this, of course, leave a like on the video. Comment down below any memories that you have with the Abzan Greasefang deck, good, bad, indifferent, or if you just enjoy playing the deck. Be sure to follow the link in the description to the Discord server as well if that's something that interests you. So talk about Magic, maybe talk about this deck, talk about some other stuff. I don't know, just some cool things to do. I love talking about Magic and that. So that's gonna do it for me this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.